What I wanted to talk about tonight was how ultimately what we're doing in formal meditation practice is preparation for all of life. That the teachings of the Buddha are a way of life, a way of living, a way of relating to everything in our life. And it's very, very important to establish a formal practice of mindfulness and of loving kindness, forgiveness, compassion, to train our minds in a dedicated, disciplined practice. But then, and I'm sure this is obvious to most of you, it's not about getting good at sitting still. It's about using the wisdom that gets developed in sitting still to apply it to every aspect of our life. That there's nothing outside of our spiritual practice. I specifically wanted to focus on the difficulties, the unavoidable difficulties that we all experience as human beings living in an impermanent realm where all relationships end in separation, where everyone we know and love will die eventually, where pleasure is fleeting and pain is unavoidable. You know the deal. You know reality. The difficulties of having taken birth. The Buddha starts the path to liberation, the teachings, with the first noble truth where he normalizes how difficult it is to be alive. How unavoidable the difficulties are in incarnation. Sickness and old age and death and separation and that this isn't, sometimes people hear the first noble truth as just like a philosophy, like, oh, the Buddha said there is suffering in life. But it's not actually a philosophy, it's a practice. What he is saying is the suffering in your life, the difficulties that you face in your life are your practice. It's not just like, oh, this is just believe this. Or this is a philosophy. Like, no, your difficulties, impermanence is your practice. Pain is your practice. That the path to liberation is turning towards what's happening. And when life is difficult, and this is, of course all of life isn't difficult. I hope all of your life isn't difficult. I hope you have some joy and some beauty and some good sex and good food, and I hope you're having some fun. But I'm not talking about that part right now. I'm talking about all of the parts that aren't fun, that are difficult, that aren't filled with joy. Part of the reason I believe that the Buddha starts with the bad news is because if we relate to the bad news wisely, skillfully, with wisdom and compassion, then all that will remain is the good stuff. All that will remain is the joy and the loving kindness and the compassion when you clear away the extra unnecessary suffering of trying to avoid, resist, or deny the reality of the difficult parts of your life. Mindfulness, the core technique that we teach and practice, begins with breath awareness. And it's important to focus on breath awareness for some time until you can concentrate, till you gather your attention, coming back to the breath over and over, learning to ignore your mind. It's very important. It's a very important foundation to break your addiction to the thinking mind, to the planning mind, to see firsthand, to have insight directly into, I don't have to obey my mind. It's really liberating when you realize you do not have to obey your thoughts or feelings. They're all optional. Do you know that yet? It is really awesome when you figure that out. And you don't live a life based on whatever your conditioned and often delusional mind is telling you to do. The first foundation is bringing attention just into the body. Let the mind be in the background. You don't have to stop your mind. Number one misconception about meditation means that you stop thinking, that you stop your mind, that you enter this still, empty place of non-thoughts. That can happen in deep states of concentration, but it's not really what the Buddha was encouraging. He said it can be an experience that happens, but it's not really the goal. The goal is to change our relationship to the mind and to the body and to the craving and aversion that arises in this mind and body. So in the first foundation, we just get into the body. We get present with what is, what's happening right now. Let go of the future. Let go of the past. Be present. The second level in the present is you begin to see everything that's happening here and now feels either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Every time a car passes, your body perceives that. There's something in you. There's a perception of that sound that's happening instantly as that is pleasant, that is unpleasant, or that is neutral. Every sight right now with your eyes open, you're in your body, you're experiencing pleasure or pain just from what you're seeing. And you could look around and some people would feel pleasant and some people would feel unpleasant and a lot of people would feel neutral. You wouldn't even see some of the people. But pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, these three feeling tones constantly happening. Mindfulness brings us into contact with that, and then we can start to use all of our body's experience as practice. Mindfulness not only shows us what's happening, it also shows us our, I might even say, dysfunctional relationship to what's happening. If functional would mean that which ends suffering and brings ease and peace and well-being into our lives, and dysfunctional would be that which creates suffering and stress and unnecessary difficulty. When we're practicing mindfulness, we're really practicing compassion for pain. Because mindfulness brings us into what's happening, and a lot of what's happening is unpleasant. And the wise response to unpleasant experiences is caring about it. Meeting it with mercy, meeting it with forgiveness, with friendliness. But this is a radical proposal, because if you've been practicing mindfulness, as you have, at least for the last 30 minutes, you see that that's not what happens naturally inside here. What happens naturally is you have pain and your body hates it. And your mind starts trying to figure out, how can I get rid of it? There's nobody that is born with natural compassion for their own pain. Some of us are born with some empathy and compassion for other people's pain. But none of us, I've got young children, I'm watching this experiment as they grow. They don't know how to care about their own pain. They hate it. They want it to go away. And you can't teach a kid very young how to just accept and tolerate. And the Buddha said maybe at 7 years old you can start teaching these sort of wisdoms. But even that, it seems really young to me. The natural relationship to pain is hatred, is aversion, is being stressed about it. The Buddha's teachings encourage us to do this radical against the norm relationship, which is to meet it with friendliness, to tolerate it and learn to care about it. As you saw in the instructions, going from breath awareness, body awareness, including emotions, including all of the sense doors, even the thinking mind, to the point where your whole body, your whole being, every aspect of your experience is your practice, is your meditation. There's no distraction. Even the thinking mind, it's happening right now. Thoughts are arising. Mindfulness of thoughts arising and passing. Some are pleasant thoughts, some are unpleasant thoughts, some are neutral. The formal practice, we do this with ourselves. And it's very important to get good at it, to get long-term, disciplined. Learn to sit with every aspect of yourself. Learn to meet it with compassion. Learn to, as I ended the instructions, to forgive yourself for everything. Forgive this judging mind. It knows not what it does. It's not even the mind's fault. It's just an old operating system. There isn't kind of human 2.0 yet. We're still operating on this maybe millions of years old survival instinct that's just all about craving and attachment and fear and aversion. And forgive your mind for being so outdated. Wes Nisker, one of the teachers that I like, who studies evolutionary biology, he says, as human beings, we're just this really baby species. We're the newest of the bipeds. We haven't been around that long. We're in our infancy. He says maybe as a species, eventually mindfulness will become more natural to us. Maybe in thousands or millions of years, like humans will be born with mindfulness, and we'll look back on like this generation in the 21st century and be like, wow, they're like cave people. They weren't even mindful. They had to meditate. They had to train their minds just to not hate themselves. Can you believe how unevolved those 21st century human beings were? Right? We think we're so evolved humans. Maybe in a few more million generations, it will become more natural for us to be kind to ourselves. As we learn to use all of our internal experience as practice, then we take it off of the cushion and we treat all of life as practice. And we turn all of the difficulties, this is the goal, the intention, all of life into practice. All of the difficulties of our lives into an opportunity for compassion. Could you imagine really, really doing that? So that every time shit wasn't going your way, you were like, oh, nice, an opportunity. Every time you were losing a loved one, relationship was ending, you weren't getting your way, to see it as an opportunity for practice. This is what's happening now. Can I meet it with mindfulness? This is what it feels like in my body when she walks away, when he walks away, when whatever difficulty happens. This is a practice of mindfulness. In the real world, in our relationships, in our jobs, on the freeway, do you use driving as a meditation practice? We're so self-centered. We think everyone's in our way. If they would just get out of my way. I heard a teacher years ago ask a large group of people, when was the last time you stopped and realized you're part of the problem? I'm sorry, I'm in everybody's way. All of these people on the 405 want to go somewhere, and I'm blocking their progress. I say difficulties, but it's really all of life. Both sides that become our practice. The Buddha talks about the 8 vicissitudes that both praise and blame, and pleasure and pain, and gain and loss, and fame and disrepute. And that both sides are your practice. When you're getting praise and you feel inflated, through mindfulness, to say, oh, this is what it feels like when my ego likes the attention. When my sense of self is inflated. It's pleasant, it's spacious, it's warm. Practice, non-attachment. Don't get addicted to praise. But when it happens, let it come, let it go. Don't blow it off too quickly. Part of humility is accepting praise. Not saying, no, not me, you. It was nothing. But to actually just say thank you when somebody says something nice to you or about you, or to learn to just accept it. And part of humility, which is a core and important central, one of the things the Buddha starts the teachings on loving kindness about, in the Metta Sutta, he says to be humble and not conceited. To be easily contented. And the other aspect of humility is when you're getting criticized. When people are not being kind, when someone is being critical, to be able to feel the ouch and the bruise of the self or the ego, and to meet that with compassion rather than hatred, and to have the humility to say, big surprise, I'm getting criticized, I'm getting judged. That's unavoidable. It's going to happen. I read or heard somewhere that some neurobiology study about the brain, that they said something that the part of the brain that remembers pain and criticism is almost like jagged, like Velcro, like hooks, like it's sticky. The part of your mind that remembers the pain in your life and the times where you were criticized, like it sticks, that part of your brain. But the part of your brain that experiences and remembers praise and pleasure is like very actually smooth. It's not, it's like Teflon or something. That it's harder to remember pleasure and praise and pleasantness than it is to remember pain. And again, I think operating system that says pain equals death, not survival, and we're kind of in this survival mode, we have to remember the pain. But we have to practice with that mind, knowing that you're going to remember the pain more. You're going to have resentments, like when we judge ourselves, this so difficult to forgive ourselves because it's programmed into us to resent pain and people who cause us pain, and when we cause ourselves pain. That's why forgiveness is not just a decision that you can make. Like you can say, oh, I forgive you, or I forgive myself. But you actually don't have the power to just make that decision not for long term anyways. In that one moment, maybe you can let go and forgive. But it doesn't mean that you forgive forever. Maybe in that one moment you can say, right now I let go. And the more you let go of the resentment, the more you practice letting go, the better more skilled you become at it. I know for myself, when I reflect on the beginning of my meditation practice, 25 years ago, sitting in a jail cell, juvenile hall cell, and how much pain and difficulty and fear, and in the midst of addiction and consequence of felonies, and what a difficult time that was in my life. But that something, and can't completely point to it, but something changed, that rather than meeting all of that pain and difficulty with hatred and with denial, which I'd done the first up to that point, and blaming everyone else, I think the turning point for me that started me practicing meditation was that for the first time in my life, I took responsibility, total personal responsibility. I'd been locked up a whole bunch of times, and it had been everyone else's fault. It was the cops. Mm-hmm. It was the system. It was society. It was the man oppressing me. I'm just a friendly crackhead. Your friendly neighborhood crackhead. Stealing from you. But then when I saw, oh no, I got myself into this. This isn't everyone else. I got myself into this place, into this trouble, into this suffering. I'm the one doing the drugs, doing the crimes, that there was hope. And as I started meditating, it was also when I realized I don't have to obey my mind. My mind's not a trustworthy advisor. Got me into all of this trouble. And through meditation, taking responsibility and saying, well, if I got myself into this, maybe I can get myself out. Maybe meditation will help. Mindfulness, allowing me to ignore my mind and all of that bad advice, all of those cravings and delusions. And turning that situation into a practice, into an opportunity to begin meditating, to begin practicing, even right there in that jail cell. And that over the years, taking the formal practice and teachings as a very, very important part of a spiritual path, but then taking all of the informal opportunities that we have all of the time, every day, as an opportunity for practice. I feel like a lot of the beginning of practice, and the Buddha's teachings are pretty big on renunciation. What do we stop doing? What are the things that have been causing us suffering that it's time to let go of? That it's time to renounce, to abstain from? The lying, the stealing, the cheating, the self-centered, fear-based actions. Renunciation is a very important aspect of the path. And I benefited a lot from abstaining, and I even spent some time celibate, almost 2 years, where I said I'll even practice complete sexual abstinence and celibacy. And from that discipline, I learned a lot about impermanence, watching craving arise as I was already off of drugs and alcohol, and then seeing the craving of sexual desires and arise and pass, and saying, oh, I can tolerate this, and it's all impermanent. Even these base carnal lusts. They also are impermanent. They don't last forever. You don't have to satisfy them. You don't have to do what your mind says, what your body says. It's optional. I might make it sound a little easier than it actually is. At some point for me, and also when you start to study Buddhism, there's a lot of the Buddha was a monastic, was a full renunciate, and was somebody who renounced the world and renounced relationships and sexual relationships and renounced money and engagement in professional livelihood. And for me, in my early practices, that was all very attractive, and I thought for many years that maybe I'd become a monk and dedicate full time to Dharma practice. There was some sense in me, a shift that happened, that although I really honor the monastics and that full renunciation that monks and nuns do, there was something in me that felt like I wanted an engagement with the world, not a renunciation of the world, but an engagement of the world as part of my own healing. It became really clear to me that I wanted to be able to be mindful in relationships, not abstaining from them. I wanted to be mindful and compassionate, engaged with money, with sexuality, with family and parenting, as practice. And that I truly take everything in my life, imperfectly, but intentionally, if that makes sense. My intention is to take my marriage as a practice, as a spiritual practice, as a practice of mindfulness, as a practice of forgiveness and compassion and trying to be kind, and also as a practice of humility for all of the times when I'm not skillful and not as kind or compassionate or forgiving as I'd like to be. But engaging in a relationship as Buddhist practice. Engaging in the practice of parenting and the natural, primal, cellular attachment to your children, to my children, as a practice of non-clinging. And through years and years of meditation, you can just watch the clinging arise when it comes to your children. How many parents in the room? Some. But it's the cellular, and I think maybe even more for moms than dads, but dads too. It's just in you to like, I have to protect this being. When my wife was pregnant with our daughter, who's almost 5 years old, I was in this room one night teaching a death meditation. And even after 20 years of doing death meditations, I had a little bit of denial about my new parenting that was about to happen. My wife's still pregnant, our daughter not even born yet. And it occurred to me, like really consciously, and my unborn child is going to die. And just what that feels like to be awake to that, rather than in denial and setting it aside and pretending like that's not what's happening here. This baby that is being born is subject to sickness and death. And feeling the pain of that, even though it's just a thought, but it's a painful thought based on reality. I saw a billboard this week that said, 1 out of 3 children born today will live to be 100 years old. that's sort of with medicine what's going on now, is that a third of the population that are born these days are going to live to be 100. That's nuts. I don't even know if it's true, but it was on a billboard. Teaching Buddhism is my practice. I get up here. I often don't have anything planned. And I practice mindfulness and try to recall what the Buddha taught and how it's useful, how it points out the causes and the solution, the cause of suffering and the way to end suffering. When I get in my car afterwards, I try to use driving home as practice, practicing mindfulness. When I walk into my house, I try to use the walk-in as walking meditation, and my wife, I try to use her mood as practice. To gauge how tired is she, how was the day. I'm often a little bit hyper after teaching a class. I've got some energy, and she's ready for bed, so then that's a practice. Like, okay, you want to go to sleep? I want to talk. I want to get you back for all the times I'm trying to go to sleep, and you want to talk. There's a Tibetan Buddhist practice of prayer where they say, on a regular basis, and sort of an aspiration, they say, may I be met with the appropriate difficulties today, so that I have the opportunity to respond with compassion, with kindness, with mercy, with loving kindness. Could you imagine actually praying every day for difficulty? And I think it's important and pertinent that it says the appropriate. The appropriate amount of difficulty today, just as much as I can handle, as I can practice with. But rather than seeing the difficulties and stresses and relationships and everything that we're in as some sort of blessing or curse, or seeing it all as practice, and how mindfulness can make our whole life a life of spiritual practice. Every aspect, nothing outside. Nothing outside of our practice. Those are some of my thoughts about the Buddha's teachings and this guidance for us to engage with our whole life. I think the last thing that comes to mind is how when we do this and when we really deeply engage with ourselves and with each other, well, there's two things. One is the humility of that we can do these practices imperfectly. I think I said it, the aspiration to use it all as practice, and then the humility that we're going to fail. That there's going to be all those moments where we're not being mindful, where we're not being as kind or loving or generous as we aspire to be, that we'd like to be. And the humility to keep going, to keep practicing, to keep trying to forgive ourselves, no matter how much our mind judges us. And the other piece is that there's something that happens for everyone, every sincere practitioner, I believe, where there's a shift from I'm doing this practice for me, for self-help, to end my suffering, to a more altruistic, I'm practicing for the benefit of all living beings, not just for myself. I think just about everybody comes into the Dharma because of our own suffering. One level or another. We're stressed out, we're suffering, we're addicted, we're angry, we're afraid. And then at some point, the Dharma, the practice of the Buddha's teachings, heals much of what originally motivates us. And we keep practicing, not just for ourselves, but so that we can help, so that we can be part of the solution, so that we can live our life in a more altruistic. And I don't like altruistic because it feels a little too 100%. And I don't trust anybody that says they're 100% altruistic, but mostly. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that there's often some, unless you're fully a liberated being, there's some self in many of our activities. So may we practice for our own liberation and for the benefit of all living beings.